Today, we're going to crack open a genetic puzzle that starts with a really tough question, one that can be deeply personal and, for some families, completely life-changing.
So here's the big question, right? It doesn't seem to make sense. You have two perfectly healthy parents, and yet they can have a child with a fatal genetic condition. How is that even possible? Well, the answer is actually hiding in the basic rules of genetics. So let's dive in.
Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, we have to start with the fundamentals. We need to look at one of the core rules of how we inherit our traits.
And that core principle has a fancy name, autosomal recessive inheritance. I know it sounds super technical, but stick with me, it's actually pretty straightforward. Autosomal just means the gene we're talking about isn't one of the sex chromosomes. And recessive? Well, that's the key part. It means the trait can hide. It can be lurking in the background. For a recessive condition to actually show up, you need to get a mutated copy of that gene from both of your parents. Not just one, but both.
This is where the idea of being a carrier comes in. So, a carrier is someone who has one normal copy of a gene and one mutated copy. And here's the thing, that one good copy is usually more than enough to do the job so the person is totally healthy. They might go their whole lives having absolutely no idea they're even carrying this mutated gene. The hidden risk only pops up when two carriers, who both have that same hidden gene, decide to have a child. So what are the odds? Well, every single time two carriers have a kid, it's kind of like a roll of the genetic dice. You've got a 25% chance the child gets two normal genes, totally unaffected. There's a 50% chance the child is a carrier, just like their parents, healthy, but carrying that hidden gene. And then there's a 25% chance the child gets a mutated copy from both parents and ends up with the disease. This 25, 50, 25 split, that's the classic textbook ratio.
All right, so we've got our foundation, that classic 25-50-25 rule. But now, things are about to get really interesting. We're going to look at a real-world condition called alpha thalassemia, which takes this simple rule and throws in a fascinating little twist.
So, alpha thalassemia plays by all the same recessive inheritance rules we just went over. But yeah, there's a twist. And it's this one little detail that completely changes the game. It's what creates this huge range of possibilities, a whole spectrum of outcomes.
And believe it or not, this whole massive twist boils down to just one number, 4. Yep, not 2, 4. So, what on earth does the number 4 have to do with genetics?
Okay, here it is. For almost all of our genes, right, we get one copy from mom and one from dad. A simple pair. But for this one specific gene, the alpha-globin gene, which is super important for making hemoglobin, you know, the stuff in our red blood cells that carries oxygen, we don't have 2 copies. We have 4. This whole concept is called gene dosage, and it is the absolute key to cracking our puzzle.
See, when you have 4 copies instead of 2, the disease stops being a simple on or off switch. It's not just you have it or you don't. Instead, it creates this incredible spectrum of possibilities, and where you fall on that spectrum depends entirely on how many of those 4 genes are actually working.
Let's break that spectrum down. It maps perfectly to the number of good genes you have. If all 4 are working, you're totally fine, no disease. Missing just one, you're what's called a silent carrier. You'd never even know it. Now, what if you're missing 2? That gives you something called alpha thalassemia trait, which usually just means you have mild anemia. But from here, things get serious fast. If you're missing 3 genes, you have a much more severe condition called HBH disease. And if you're missing all 4, that's the fatal condition we started with.
I mean, just look at that relationship. As the number of working genes goes down, the severity of the disease doesn't just creep up, it skyrockets. It's a really powerful reminder of just how critical every single one of these gene copies really is.
Okay, so we've got the theory down. Now, let's bring it back to our family. How do those classic 25-50-25 odds we talked about play out in this much more complicated 4-gene system?
So, let's look at the parents in our story. Both of them have alpha thalassemia trait. What that means is they each have only 2 working alpha-globin genes out of the usual 4. Now, for them, personally, this probably just means they have a very mild anemia, something they might not even notice. But the most important part? They are both carriers.
All right, let's game this out. Because of their specific genetic situation, each parent can pass on one of 2 things: a chromosome with 2 working genes or a chromosome with 0 working genes. That gives us 4 possible combinations for their child. Think about it. They could get 0 from one parent and 0 from the other, or 0 and 2, or 2 and 0, or 2 and 2.
And when you add up all those possibilities, what do you get? Well, look at that. You get the exact same 25-50-25 odds we started with. There's a 25% chance of a child getting 4 working genes, perfectly healthy. A 50% chance of getting 2 working genes, a carrier, just like mom and dad. And a 25% chance of getting 0 working genes, the fatal outcome. And that is how 2 healthy parents can have a child with a lethal condition. It all comes back to the math.
So why did we go through all that detail? Well, because alpha thalassemia is just a perfect real-world case study. It shows how a seemingly simple genetic rule can lead to incredibly complex and really varied results.
So what are the big takeaways here? First, then a basic rule of inheritance can have truly massive consequences. Second, this idea of gene dosage is powerful. It can create a whole spectrum from completely healthy to tragically lethal. And finally, and this is really important, these carrier states are actually pretty common in some populations. So understanding this whole genetic story is absolutely vital, not just for doctors and scientists, but for families making real-life decisions.
You know, there's a quote from the research that just summed us up perfectly. It calls this condition an elegant demonstration of a continuous spectrum of severity. It's not black and white, it's a sliding scale. And where a child lands on that scale is decided entirely by which combination of genes they happen to inherit from their 2 healthy carrier parents.
What this whole story shows us is that sometimes, by digging just one level deeper than the textbook rule, you uncover this entire fascinating new layer of understanding. It kind of makes you wonder, right? What other simple biological rules have these amazing, elegant complexities just hiding right under the surface, waiting to be discovered?